EIS process that we're going through right now. Ioneer and Women's Mining Coalition have a long history, and in fact, Ruth Cowher was someone who introduced the project to Bernard in the onset, and we're thankful for the participation and the support of Women's Mining Coalition over the years, and the support of some of our colleagues, several of which I see are on the participant list today in Women's Mining Coalition. So what we're going to do is we're going to step through a few slides that are an update on the project and just give some general background. And I appreciate that some of you might have heard this in mid-April in Washington. And the good news is it's not entirely redundant. Things have even moved forward since then. So I hope you'll find that useful. The second part of the presentation will focus on the draft EIS and slides that BLM presented in a virtual open house that took place about 10 days ago. And we'll use those as a way to help everyone understand the draft EIS, what's contained there, and help provide some more details on the commenting process. Don't worry if you'll see that some of these slides are text heavy. We're going to provide these slides to the group, as well as this is being recorded, so there'll be a record of this if you'd like to go back and see. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get into the presentation. We'll spend, at this point, probably 35 minutes or so through the slides and leave some time for Q&A. And once again, thanks for taking your time. I know it's midday. Thanks for taking your lunchtime, and thanks to Women's Mining Coalition for letting us do this. The next slide, please, is a disclaimer. Please go ahead and read that at your convenience. Next slide, please. So Bernard and I will sort of go back and forth through the presentation, but I'll have Bernard provide sort of these commentary on the first 2 or 3 slides. So Bernard, I'll hand it over to you.
Bernard, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Chad. Thank you, Hayley and Lindsay and the team at the Women's Mining Coalition for the opportunity to talk today and run through a few slides on Rhyolite Ridge. I'm going to focus on the geology ones. Those of you who know me know that I'm a geologist, a die-hard explorationist. And, you saw on the front page, it's, what Ioneer is all about is providing the materials necessary for a sustainable planet for the energy transition, with obviously very much a focus in the United States, so that it's domestic, it's stable, it's secure supply, and it's sustainable. But the other message might well be, from a geology perspective, is when you go out and explore, expect the unexpected, because that's exactly what Rhyolite Ridge is. It's a completely different kind of sedimentary deposit. There's not another one like it anywhere in the world, and we and people on our team, including a number of ex-Rio Tinto people, have actually spent many decades looking for these sorts of deposits. So it's a really unusual one, and I'm just going to try and briefly explain why that is and what the ramifications are, and why I say, when you're exploring, you must expect the unexpected if you're going to be successful. So sedimentary deposits, most people more automatically and understandably think of clay, and high clay content rocks, lacustrine or lake bed sediments that were deposited generally close to volcanic centres of some kind or another, a caldera or other volcanic rocks, and the lithiums had something to do with coming from those volcanic rocks and ending up in these very fine-grained sediments that get deposited in ancient lake beds. Now, Rhyolite Ridge does have some of that material, and there's a photo of it on the right, but it also has this other rock type, which is really unusual because it's full of boron, and the rock itself is about 50% the mineral siliciite, and as far as we know, it's the largest accumulation of siliciite in a boron deposit anywhere in the world. And it's also the only one that has very significant quantities of lithium. So you've really got, essentially two and actually now three different types of rock types within the Rhyolite Ridge project that are very, very different than just the traditional clay-hosted lithium mineralization. And that has major ramifications when it comes to processing, and you'll see why. Next slide, please, Lindsay. So what we found over time as we started working on this project back in 2016 is that the silicic-rich mineralization, and silicite is a sodium boron silica mineral. Well, when you acid leach it, that mineral is not soluble in the acid. The boron is soluble and the sodium soluble, but the silica stays as a solid. And that means that you can crush this rock and leach it with sulfuric acid, and it doesn't lose its structural integrity. So the rock fragments stay as rock fragments. And the photo on the left here is what it looks like. We crushed this rock. In this particular case, this was crushed at 6 inches in size. So a very coarse crush. And we leached it with sulfuric acid and a water mix. That's what it looked like before. And the photo on the right shows what it looked like afterwards. And so you can see it doesn't really change much. And the major implication for that is that then it's easy to wash, it's easy to filter, it's easy to dewater. And in fact, you don't even have to use filtration. You can use gravity to dewater it. And the implication of that then is that Rhyolite Ridge is the only known lithium boron deposit anywhere in the world, or lithium deposit anywhere in the world, that you can actually use heap or vat leaching. So you don't have to finely crush, you don't have to grind the rock, you don't have to put it in an agitation tank and make it into very fine material. You can just coarse crush it. So that means you can vat leach it by just putting the coarse material in a vat, or you can in fact heap leach it. And to the best of our knowledge, there is not another lithium deposit anywhere on the planet that you can heap leach. Next slide, please. So these are some of the photos of some of the tests. So we did some very large tests of leach columns. This was all done at KCA, at Kappas Cassidy in Reno, and Dave Krul there in the photo for scale. So we were doing 6 metre high columns of this material at anywhere between 3/4 of an inch and 6-inch crush size to demonstrate that, in fact, this could be heap leached. And what we found, to everyone's surprise, was just how well it maintains its consistency, its integrity as that leaching happens. And so we don't have any blockages in these leach tests. We don't have any percolation issues. The material doesn't compact, it doesn't subside in the columns, and it behaves extremely well. And that's why, as I said before, that you can actually heap leach this material. We're going to vat leach it, which is a very similar process. It just allows you to maintain a constant temperature, which is important because of all the boron. But otherwise, the rock is very, very straightforward to leach, to wash, and then drain and dewater. Next slide, please. Chad, I think I'm going to hand back to you for these, aren't I?
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. So what we wanted to sort of walk through here after Bernard kind of explained that uniqueness of mineralogy is what other facets of this project make it unique as far as the development. And I think that here are 6 things that just demonstrate the work that Ioneer and the team have done over the last 7 years with a lot of help from advisors and regulators and stakeholders and such. So the Rhyolite Ridge project, we expect to be fully permitted within 2024. We have, from a partnership perspective, we have offtake contracts for our lithium with Ford, Toyota, Panasonic, and EcoPro. And that kind of dovetails with the point just below there with engineering, where the amount of engineering design that we have complete, 70%, is far greater than what currently exists when a development project goes into construction. And that's helped us get that third-party validation from potential customers, some of which were participating in our pilot plant activities back in 2019 and helping us with the flow sheet and getting comfortable with the flow sheet and getting comfortable that we could ultimately deliver the lithium carbonate and boric acid that we are going to produce. From a funding perspective, that validation has resulted in a couple of key components. One, we have a partnership contingent on permitting with Sibanye-Stillwater, who have, amongst other things, the Stillwater mine out in Montana, for $490 million of equity funding for the project. And in early 2023, we received a conditional commitment from the DOE Loan Program Office for a loan of up to $700 million. We're going to start out producing lithium, and what's being permitted is to produce lithium for about 370,000 cars a year. However, this is really a large deposit, a world-class deposit. And at this point, we have a resource estimate that suggests that if all of the resource were mined, you would produce enough lithium for over 50 million cars. So that's the last point. We're focusing today on what we're permitting, but there's certainly opportunities for growth in the future. Next slide, please. On the permitting process, and don't fret, we won't walk through this whole timeline, but what's important is to sort of look at how far we've come. You see on the vertical arrow where we are with the draft DEIS being published in mid-April. We're in that 45-day comment period that will end on June 3rd. Subsequent to that, those comments will be incorporated into the final EIS. And as that's happening, because of the presence of the endangered species team buckwheat, there's also a Section 7 consultation underway with Fish and Wildlife that we'll expect to conclude somewhere there in the third quarter. At this point, the schedule and what we have with BLM suggests that the record of decision would be in October of 2024, which allows us to subsequently take a final investment decision with our partners and are looking towards expected first production in 2027 at this point. Next slide, please. What's allowed us to come this far is really a team that has a far greater experience than one would typically expect at a development project. So we have persons, for example, on our board who have put lithium chemicals facilities from development into production, that being James Calloway, our executive chair, Alan Davies, who was formerly at Rio Tinto and was in charge of the base metals business, which also included U.S. borax, so has real experience operating boric acid facilities. We also have a lot of experience on other matters of project development in the U.S. Maggie Walker was formerly doing that very job for Dow Chemical, and also matters of social justice and ESG. Rose McKinney James, who's a Nevadan who we're fortunate joined our board about 3.5 years ago. So that team is really responsible for bringing this project together in the time that we have. Next slide, please. From that engineering perspective, as we said, we're about 70% complete. And this is not a cartoon. This is a 3D rendering. If you visit our website, we actually have a narrated site or tour of the processing facility. We've been working with Fluor since 2018, so we really are ready to go once we have that record of decision. Next slide, please. I've alluded to, in part, the partners that we have with regards to offtake and funding, but also you see on the left-hand pinwheel just the type of partners that we've had, and many of which have been along with us since 2018 or so, to really sort of help bring this along. And it has allowed us to get that confidence in the flow sheet, which has then allowed us to get those validators to help with funding, and certainly helped us as we've worked through all of the baseline and permitting work that we need to ultimately get the project permitted. I'm going to hand it off and back to Bernard in the next couple slides to talk a little bit more about a recent resource update, which is subsequent to the last time I spoke to this group, as well as a bit on sort of the growth opportunities that we see before us. So next slide, please, Bernard.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. So two maps here. The one on the left is the South Basin, these are both part of the Rhyolite Ridge project area, both areas, but there's a south basin which measures about it's about 6 kilometres, so around about 4 miles north south, and about 2 kilometres or 1 mile, 1.5 kilometres to 1 mile in an east-west direction. That's where most of our work is focused over the last 8 years. And on this diagram, you can see the black dots are the drill holes that we've drilled over time, and some holes that had already been drilled before we came here. There's also in a sort of an light aqua blue color. There's a circle around that's outlining the critical habitat of Teams buckwheat. So the Teams buckwheat areas specifically are shown in the sort of the pink polygons. But you can see that the Teams buckwheat only grows along the western margin of the deposit. That presented a bit of a challenge for us because earlier on, most of the drilling had been done along that western side. But over time, as we've pushed out to the east, and particularly to the south and southeast, we've defined further resources that are well outside of the critical habitat and are quite some distance from the buckwheat. And then the coloured areas are shaded as measured, indicated, and inferred. So basically what you can see is that we've drilled probably a little bit over a half of the basin to date. Now, of course, we don't know what we're going to find as we drill the remaining areas. However, to date, it's been really quite consistent that wherever we drill, we've hit the mineralisation, other than the far south, where we start to get into the volcanic sort of wall rocks of the deposit. So, and using geophysics, we can easily see where those volcanic rocks are, combination of gravity and magnetics. So there's a large footprint, 351 million tonnes in the resource as it's currently drilled, and we expect that to grow significantly as we drill the remainder of the deposit, which will be done after we get rod. We've identified just in the last phase of drilling, or a couple of phases of drilling, which were completed in mainly in 2023 as part of the geotechnical program that we were doing under NEPA. We identified this highly promising shelf zone, and the importance of that is that it's completely outside of critical habitat. It's shallow, and in fact, in some parts, even though it's out in the middle of the basin, we found that there's uplifted blocks of the basin stratigraphy, the sediments that host the lithium and the boron, to the extent that they actually subcrop beneath the gravel. So there's gravel on top that's recent gravel, unconsolidated recent gravel, and then you go straight into the actual units that host the ore. So that's a really attractive area for us, and that in all likelihood that is where we will start mining, and we're just updating the mine plan as we speak. We also have the North Basin. It's about 3 or 4 miles further to the north. Rio Tinto drilled this in the 1980s and 1990s. John Reynolds, who's on our team for the Ioneer team and is a geologist with decades of experience, was actually one of the geologists who worked for US Borax and drilled, not all, but drilled some of these holes. So we've got we have all the data for those holes, so we know exactly where things are. However, because of the age of the holes and the data and the way it was collected, we can't use it for resource calculation purpose, but we can use it as a guide. Well, in 2016, just to confirm that Rio data, we drilled 2 holes, and they're shown there, and you'll see some leach test work that we did on those holes in an upcoming slide. So there's huge tonnage potential for growth beyond the more than 3 million tonnes of lithium carbonate equivalent that we've already defined. So this truly is, as Chad mentioned, a world-class deposit by any measure. Thanks. Next slide, please. I've actually already mentioned a fair bit of this, so I'm not going to read through it, but it talks about the shelf zone. We put out quite a detailed press release back in last month at the end of April, and so if anyone's interested, please go and have a look at that. There's a lot of information in there, but the big increases every time we drill out at Rhyolite Ridge. What ends up happening with a great deal of confidence is we end up increasing significantly the resource. So you can see there's 71% increase in the overall measured resource, 75 million tonnes compared to the 44 million that we had the previous year. And that's going to grow further because that did not include the holes down in the south, the far southeast. So they are not yet in the resource. They're being added to it now. There was about 15 holes that were pending at the time. And one thing I should have mentioned, of course, with the resource is that it's not just 3.2 million tonnes of lithium carbonate. It's nearly 13 million tonnes of boric acid to make it one of the world's larger boron deposits as well. And, obviously putting those two together makes Rhyolite Ridge a really unique deposit. Next slide, please. You want to take this one, Ched?
Sure.
Or me?
I'm happy to. Thanks, Bernie, for that. I think one of the tenets of the development from the onset have been our commitment to sustainability, and we sort of have focused on some real sort of pillars of areas, sort of keeping from a low emissions perspective. We're going to be using CO2-free power for the heat and the electricity necessary for our operation, and all that will be generated off grid without a gas pipeline. We've done all we can to engineer a process with low water use. We're going to recycle over 50% of the water that we have, and we're going to work hard to improve that further over time. The deposit lends itself to a small footprint. This isn't a type of operation that has the large solar evaporative ponds, for example, and really is a small mine by sort of Nevada mining standards in any case. Focused as well on efficient equipment and then that notion of sustainability, which we are following protocols towards sustainable mining with regards to various ESG and socioeconomic concerns. We've done, of course, all the baseline work and all the work through the NEPA process, and been a lot of focus on, of course, conservation and protection of the rare plant species, Team's buckwheat as well. Next slide, please. Oh, I think we skipped one back. Oh, there we go. Just wanting to sort of, again, frame out what the rest of the year will likely look like for Ioneer. We have, again, as Bernard said, we did some subsequent we did drilling in the last couple of years, and we'll get some more updates on that as far as a resource. We then are sort of doing these activities to go towards a final investment decision for being an updated mine plan. We have to update our capital expense and operating expense estimates so that, of course, we understand our ultimate funding needs and are working with our partners then to reach that final investment decision. And of course, from a NEPA perspective, the next steps would be a final environmental impact statement and a record of decision, which obviously would be necessary to reach that FID decision. So that, I hope, gives you a bit of just an overview of the Rhyolite Ridge project, but we're here today really to focus on what's being permitted and what is the draft DEIS is all about. So Lindsay, if we go to the next slide, will be a break. But what we've done is the BLM did a great job of putting together slides for its virtual town hall meeting, and we just to make sure that everyone is using the same information, we've taken the liberty to use and source those slides. So what you'll see next are us sort of walking through that. And again, the draft was published in mid-April, and you can view it from a e-planning Rhyolite Ridge website that there's an address for later on in the presentation, or feel free to Google that. And you can not only view, of course, the draft EIS, but also the various SERs that support it too. And within that document, there are three alternatives that are outlined: the proposed action, the north and south overburden storage facility alternative, and a no action alternative. And just to start out and make it clear, and I won't use perhaps precise parlance, but the preferred Ioneer alternative is the north and south overburden storage facility alternative. So what NEPA, of course, is doing is getting comments and and sort of obviously looking to, there could be changes to any of these, but just to be clear, there are three alternatives being shown, and we want folks to really focus on that north and south overburden storage facility alternative. Next slide, please. Just to orient those who might not be as familiar, the project is essentially halfway between Reno and Las Vegas, near Tonopah. The small town of Dyer is closest. You see on that map, the project area includes the access road, and then that polygon would be sort of where proposed activity would take place. We had a notice of intent published for this NEPA process in late December of 2022, and then folks have been working to sort of draft this EIS and work through subsequent points and since that juncture that's led us to what was published in April. Next slide, please. Important to sort of understand perhaps is the different participating agencies in our NEPA process. And so of course there's being that the project is on federal land administrated by BLM. BLM is the lead agency. However, there are the several cooperating agencies that you see below. I see some folks that I recognize in the participant list who are part of weekly cooperating agency calls that have taken place throughout this NEPA process to date for input into that draft EIS. Next slide, please. So what we've done here, and I encourage everyone to look at all the BLM slides from the presentation, but I just for our purposes today want to focus on this north and south overburden storage facility alternative. And that is something that has really been developed over the last, one could say 8 years, but the permitting process of baselines have started in 2018 and such. And what we've done is to try and take into account feedback from various stakeholders, regulators, and try and improve upon prior potential plans. And a key part of this was in December of 2022, when Fish and Wildlife listed Teams buckwheat as an endangered species and designated area of critical habitat that was important for the not for growing the buckwheat necessarily, but for the pollinators who support the Teams buckwheat. So once we understood what that critical habitat was, we worked with all of our experts and did the work that we could to try and reduce the activity that would take place within that critical habitat that was designated. So that's really what you see, and where the north-south overburden storage facility alternative name comes from is that overburden storage facilities were sort of moved out of critical habitat. That's one thing we did, but there's been several others to remove activity. And also when we talk about stakeholders, of course, it's not just about the buckwheat. We're speaking to, and BLM has, through its 106 process, consulted with it in their press release for us, 11 tribes. So there have been matters that have been brought up that we have responded to, and again, helped to take activity away from any cultural sensitive areas that were brought up to us. So we just wanted to sort of orient you, if you're looking through the document or looking through slides, this north-south alternative is really one that I would recommend that you focus on. On our website, and there's a link on a subsequent slide, we also do have an animation that sort of shows how the activity will take place over the development period, because what you see in front of you with, and obviously I'm not going to go through it's the eye chart of the legend, but you see towards the right, the quarry and the overburden storage, part of the overburden storage. And one thing to note is, and it's very unique about how this deposit can be developed, is that we can backfill the pit and that helps with sort of reclamation timing as well. So the video hopefully will help you sort of understand how we are impacting and where we are impacting thing on a time scale that's really difficult to do in two-dimensional space. Next slide, please. I just wanted to, I won't read this list, but just so you understand, and those who perhaps have participated in draft DIS comment processes before, many of these things will be similar, but just to sort of, that this draft is the product of many years of work by many different experts and trying to understand and respond to potential environmental impacts of our potential project. So we, part of this comment period is trying to find it. Of course, perhaps something was missed, and that, as we'll see going on what the BLM is looking for is substantive comments. We have a long list here, but we're obviously part of this NEPA process is to make sure that that we've considered everything that we need to as far as environmental impact. Next slide, please. One of the impacts that is certainly close to everyone's heart and just wanted to point out is the notion of water usage and sort of how the Ioneer operation may or may not impact groundwater in the area. And so the BLM, as part of our the work that we were needed to do to get to this point, we had done an extensive groundwater model that is part of and sort of is referenced into this draft DIS. And I think that it speaks to sort of how one early planning on behalf of the company and Bernard as well, but also sort of our unique mineralogy is allowing us to sort of construct a project where we are minimizing the water that we will need, but also we're looking to and we are committing rather that we will have no increase or change in the water balance in the area of Fish Lake Valley. And we're able to do that in part because we have worked with current water users, who are primarily agriculture users, such that they have chosen to lease or sell us their water rights, such that we will not ask for any additional water rights. And we have more water rights than we need so that we can manage the water balance such that we will not increase it or upset it, what's current in the valley. Another part is that where the project is located is about 1,000 feet higher than Fish Lake Valley. It's in a separate aquifer. So we will use water from that aquifer as well. It's just that as part of the permitting process, we are not able to drill. So we don't have the information necessary to know the water that we might be able to use from that aquifer yet in great detail. So this is a slide from the BLM presentation and what is the proposed action. I just want to sort of emphasize the work that has been done on that very important topic of groundwater. Next slide, please. Another area of work, of course, where lots of research and experimentation has been done and commitments have been made is with regards to Teams buckwheat conservation. And included in one of the SIRs is a Teams buckwheat protection plan that has been developed in concert with BLM and DOE and Fish as to codify efforts that Ioneer is proposing or that are being mandated. And many of those have been things that Ioneer has voluntarily done over the last 6 or 7 years. So we've actually spent over $2.5 million thus far on Teams buckwheat conservation, including having a greenhouse in Gardnerville that's dedicated to propagating Teams buckwheat plants and is maintained by our full-time botanist. So I encourage you to have a look at that for more information on the Teams buckwheat protection plan. It's a dense document on our website as well, and you'll see a link in a moment. We have provided a summary of that Teams buckwheat protection plan, as well as a link to the plan itself. So if you'd like to learn more about that important aspect of our project, I encourage you to do so. Next slide, please. And I think that this slide is again pointing out that if you think about our efforts around teams buckwheat, which are codified and part in this buckwheat protection plan, they're really three pillars. One is that we just developed a plan to avoid any direct impact. So just to be clear, we're having no direct impact on the team's buckwheat plan as part of what we're looking to undertake. But there will be, in the second pillar, is we're looking to minimize, monitor, and mitigate for any indirect impacts within the critical habitat for the team's buckwheat. And again, that critical habitat is focused on sort of having pollinators and pollinator habitat. So you'll see a lot of the discussion around that, and you see from our plan how we've just taken as much activity as we can outside of that critical habitat. And the third pillar is conservation, and that's highlighted again in the buckwheat protection plan, but also manifests itself in something like the investment in the greenhouse that we've made and that are successfully operating and propagating plants. Next slide, please. This last slide that is sort of a picture of the proposed actions, just sort of illustrate again what happens and the commitment that and what planning has been done as far as reclamation. And you can see sort of from the left to the right how part of our plan is again to sort of do our best from a reclamation perspective and do that as efficiently as possible, and demonstrates again what the learnings over the years that's helped make this project better, where, for example, we learned about this notion of being able to backfill the pit, and that allows us to really ultimately have a smaller footprint and helps make this reclamation effort advantageous and quite unique amongst mining operations. So the next slides, and please go ahead and just sort of talk about, we're now in a comment period, and what we're discussing today is just the notion of those who are on the call or who are so inclined, providing a comment during this period. And the period ends on June 3rd. Just wanted to sort of, again, reiterate what the guidance of the BLM on sort of what comments are substantive, because that, again, is what will help make this project better. And I'll let you sort of read through this yourself, but it really is, we're wanting to, and the BLM rather, is wanting to sort of understand any new information that should be considered, any specific concerns or impacts or potential alternatives to be considered. It's not a popularity sort of up down vote situation. Next slide, please. BLM has provided several avenues to provide comments. As I've mentioned before, there's a website for the Rhyolite Ridge project, and on that site, there's a button to click to participate. And what we're going to do is provide when we send these slides over, the link that gives you that participate now comment. So you go to the exact right site. Just like any other website structure, someone could get confused. So we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to head to that particular page. And that page is the BLM sort of preferred way of conveying the comments. But alternatively, they can be submitted by email, the address you see before you, or by conventional mail, or by fax even. So there's lots of opportunities there to do that. We're going to sort of end with a few slides on sort of, we want to encourage, of course, people to draft comments however they see fit, but we also appreciate that there are, it's not always fun to start with a blank page. So what we've done is, and we can go to the next slide, is sort of try and just give some example sort of language structure. And again, comments should be written in everyone's own words, but we want to sort of, in concert with BLM and seeing other projects and other comments, we just wanted to try and give a bit of thought on what is a substantive comment. And one aspect is often sort of a statement of affirmation. just regarding the process and what's contained within the document. Let you read this yourself, but that's sort of, I'm always looking to how to start off letters. Well, a statement of affirmation is one way of doing that in a comment such as this. Next three slides, we'll talk about sort of specific areas that we might suggest you emphasize. And again, one is just that how important this project is to critical mineral domestic supply and national security. We walked through sort of what we're doing, and this is a way for us and for America to process material and upgrade it to sort of a 99% level, where most of that, over 80% of that, is being done in China to date. So we're able to really, this is a unique process and a unique project in that way for domestic supply and national security. Next slide. Because of the activity that's being able to take place in Nevada, there's an outsized sort of opportunity for economic benefit in rural Nevada, and it's an opportunity that can exist for many years. So pointing that out, and the draft DEIS has specific socioeconomic SERs that sort of point to this, but thinking about the employment of 500 people in the construction period, but 350 people during the long operations period. What does that mean from labor income and also from fiscal impacts to Esmeralda County and surrounding areas in Nevada and even the federal government? So the economic benefits of the project are something to consider pointing out as well. On the next slide, we sort of offer up one other sort of some verbiage around Teams Buckwheat, which of course, again, is a topic that is something that we've worked a lot on to help, and have worked with stakeholders, regulators, community members to try and to make a better plan, and hopefully within that draft EIS you can evaluate that and sort of speak to that if you'd like to. On the bottom of that slide, I show the note where we have materials where, for example, we have a summary of the buckwheat protection plan, but also a link to that plan. So please read all that you can and provide a comment. And as I say, just trying to then provide a few ideas for those who might want to comment. And I think that actually brings us to the final slide, is the next one. So we have, perhaps we went over a little bit, but we still have some time here for questions and answers for those who have, or comments for those who have them. And I believe that Haley or Lindsay might help us out with moderating those. So thank you for your time today, and we're happy to try and answer any questions you might have.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Bernard. There is the Q&A chat feature, but also you have the option to raise your hand and we can call on you directly and you can ask your question live if you would like to.
Haley, there is a question in the chat.
Yep, I just got it open.
Yeah.
So from Carolyn Loader, has one or more tribes asserted specific environmental issues?
So thank you for that question. And as I mentioned, the BLM is in consultation with 11 tribes. Ioneer has, and that's the 106 government to government process, which Ioneer respects entirely. We've also tried to have our direct outreach to tribes, and have done that since 2019. So we've tried to seek input, to learn, and to, when issues were raised, to try and address those as we've gone on. So as I mentioned before, there have been cultural resource matters that were raised, and we have developed changes to our plan as we have learned of those. And we have also, for example, during the BLM asked us to do some geotechnical drilling work during the NEPA process, and Ioneer voluntarily reimbursed cultural resource monitors for the surface disturbance related to those activities. And so we certainly incorporated that information as we were doing that work. But that's really I would encourage you, there's certainly an SER that addresses matters, but we've taken input and have addressed what we know through this process beginning and really with site visits amongst BLM and tribal leaders way back in 2019.
Haley, maybe I can, just while we're waiting, if there's, oh, sorry, there are hands up, so I won't. I was going to jump in and mention something else, but I'll leave it for questions.
Emily, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, perfect. Barnard, I'm happy to hold my question if you had something to add there.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. My question is just in regards to the BLM's draft solar programmatic EIS. Is your project area, does that fall within the boundaries of that EIS? And if so, are there any, potential expected impacts, or are you engaging in that process?
Chad, I'll throw that one to you. I'm assuming you're referring, Emily, to the green link.
So draft utility scale solar energy programmatic DEIS that is encompassing about 10 states. It's something WMC and Lindsay, I can never seem to remember if we have already submitted our comments on this. Thank you.
Yes.
So I'm going to take that one back because I want to answer it specifically, and we certainly are aware of the area and of that, and I'm not sure how it's addressed, quite frankly, in the draft, and so I want to go back to our expert who does know. And please I apologize for not knowing the answer off the top of my head, but I don't want to give you imprecise information.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's see. Anne, do you want to go? You should be able to unmute your mic.
Thank you. Hi, Ann Carpenter. Thank you for that presentation and the added information. I was in attendance at your Tonopah public meeting and appreciated what I learned there. This is a bit more expansive, so I appreciate it. Can you guys provide the names of the 11 tribes that the BLM are consulting with? The genesis of that question is that I'm working with a group advancing the copper moly complex, which is north of Tonopah at the Liberty Mine Complex. And I've identified potentially 5 tribes in the region. So I'm wondering how far of a net or how far the BLM is casting its net. Can you guys provide that list of tribes?
Happy to do that, and it's actually the BLM listed them in a press release that they made at the time of publishing the draft. So I know I have your email address, so I'll copy and paste that to you and highlight that information for you.
There is another question in the chat from Bob Schaefer. Did you retain a tribal relationship specialist or advisor to open up communications with the impacted and interested tribes?
Thank you for that question. So we have retained specialists in this regard since 2021. We also have a full-time tribal liaison, Tashina Jim. She's actually on this call as well, I believe. And so Tashina joined us about 15 months ago, and her full-time role is to communicate and to try and help us build relationships and also just understand concerns and then therefore address those concerns. So we have had those resources and invested in those for some time.
Are there any other questions?
If I may just add a bit to that last point, and evidence of that is with regards to the cultural resource monitoring for the geotechnical drilling activity, one of the tribes suggested that we develop a memorandum of understanding on how that cultural monitoring would work. And so we had a process where 9 tribes participated in that process to negotiate terms of a memorandum of understanding. And ultimately, multiple tribes signed that agreement. So I feel like it's a pretty unique circumstance where prior to some sort of record of decision, you have a proponent in an agreement with multiple tribes on something like cultural resource monitoring.
Okay. I don't think we have any other questions. Haley, Bernard, Chad, do you have any closing remarks or anything else?
Bernard?
I think I would add just one thing, and hopefully it sort of just helps everyone to understand the sort of how this process has changed as we've gone through it, which of course is the right way that the process should work, because I think what we end up with through the engagement that we've had, and we've put a lot of effort into engagement, whether that be with the local community in Dyer, with the tribal nations that Chad's mentioned, and Tashina's efforts there, with the local Esmeralda County and the other neighbouring counties, and all other stakeholders, including government. And of course, we firmly believe in the process, and that what you end up with at the end of that process is a far better product, if you like, than what you started with. And that's, I think, how NEPA should work. And I think, just to clarify one thing though, because I get asked this often, but nobody asked me today, so I was preempting the question before. But why didn't we? Why this north-south alternative, and why didn't we do that at the beginning? Well, things take time, of course, and we found that when we submitted the original version of this mine plan of operation, which was the second version, and it was submitted in the middle of 2022, well, Teams Buckwheat was not listed, and there was no designated critical habitat, so we couldn't design a footprint of a mining operation project like ours without knowing what they were going to be, and we didn't know. So that's really why there was the proposed action, and then there was the north-south alternative developed once we knew what that critical habitat was, what sort of footprint was it. So when you read through the documents, it's a complex document because it has the original from mid-2022 in there, as well as what we've developed over time. But anyway, as I said, the process has worked extremely well. We're very happy with how it's progressed through NEPA, and it's a good example of how I think when you come together, sit down at the table, and you can come up with solutions, and that's what's worked here. So, and finally, just thank you everybody, Haley and Lindsay and the rest of the Women's Mining Coalition. We're a very proud supporter of the coalition and will continue to be. And thanks everyone for your time today.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Chad. We really appreciate the opportunity to have you present to our membership and greater audience, and we look forward to supporting your project as it progresses.
Thanks very much. Chad, you're on mute.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.